Wednesday night class, we're doing a survey of the Old Testament. And right now we are in the book of Numbers. So kind of set our context just a little bit. Of course, we've brought the children of Israel out of Egyptian bondage. They have been at Mount Sinai, and Moses has received the law from God on Mount Sinai. As they approached the promised land, you remember they sent spies, 12 spies in. All the spies came back with a unanimous report. It's a wonderful place. But 10 of the 12 spies said, the problem is we can't ever take it because the people who are there are much stronger and bigger, and their cities are fortified, and it's a fruitless endeavor. We'll never be able to conquer the land. The exception, of course, Joshua and Caleb, who were 2 of the 12 spies. And so God made a strict punishment. You're not going, okay, since you've done this, you're not going to go to the promised land for 40 years. And everybody 20 years old and older, who at this point has demonstrated this incredible lack of faith, going to die in the wilderness. Anybody 20 and older is not going to go, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb, who had expressed their faith that God would deliver the land to them. So that's sort of where we're at. That episode had just happened here in the book of Numbers, and so we are ready to start. Let me see where I made my mark here. We're ready to start lesson 8 if you're looking at your study guide. You don't need that. You can follow along with us. We're in Numbers chapter 15. Numbers chapter 15. Again, this is a survey study, so we're not reading every verse. We're not going verse by verse and not even necessarily looking at every chapter. We're just hitting the highlights in this sort of a survey study. There's an interesting episode that occurs now. So the wilderness, so-called wilderness wanderings begin, 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And as this gets started, in chapter 15 at verse 32, Numbers 15, verse 32, while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man that gathered sticks upon the Sabbath day. And they that found him gathering sticks brought him unto Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. They put him in ward, because it was not declared what should be done to him. And the Lord said unto Moses, the man shall be surely put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones without the camp. And all the congregation brought him without the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died as the Lord had commanded Moses. All right, so of course the Sabbath law has been given now, officially given on Mount Sinai. The Sabbath law didn't exist before Mount Sinai. But for the Israelites now, no work on the Sabbath day was the law. And so they found this man, and he was doing the simple task of picking up stones on the Sabbath, or not stones, picking up sticks on the Sabbath day. And so they reported this episode to Moses, and they held him in custody, so to speak. The Lord said to Moses that this man should be put to death, stoned with stones. This is a fairly well-known episode, and sometimes, I want to get your feedback on this. People who don't believe in God, don't believe in the Bible, will use an episode like this and say, is that the God you serve? Is that the kind of God you want me to believe in? This guy doing something as simple as picking up sticks, and you're going to kill him for that? Are you kidding me? Is this your God? And then, of course, you could build up all kinds of hypothetical to sort of embellish the story. Maybe he had a sick child in his tent, and maybe it was a chilly morning, and he needed to build a little fire to keep that kid warm. He was sick and suffering. And you're going to tell me that God says, stone that man, put him to death for violating the Sabbath law? I'd like to get your feedback. How are you going to answer that? Because that sort of accusation is sometimes made. How are you going to approach that? Anybody want to start that conversation? Wade? All right. So I think the point you make is a good one. In fact, it's very apropos in our current society. Laws without enforcement are not laws. In other words, if you have rules and you don't enforce the rules, then you might as well not even have the rules because they serve no purpose. And so I think that is a worthy observation. But come on, this is just a few sticks. And again, I'm arguing that potentially this guy's got a sick child in his tent. He needs to boil a little water, make a little soup, do something to help this kid who's sick. And you're going to tell me you're going to stone him? I saw another hand. Who wants to go on that? Aaron?
Well, I don't know that I want to go on. I do to remind you. The one I think of the most, even after accountability, is the thought of justice. Obviously, there was something that happened that in God's justice, that the just thing was for him to be put to death. And we've got to trust in that.
Yeah, I like that argument because we don't know this whole story. There's just a few lines here, really. There was obviously a lot more backstory to this event that we don't know. And so, you got to be careful about judging on the limited information that we have. I think that's true. One of the, Landon.
Verses 30 and 31, right before that, talks about a person presumptuously sinning. So that may tie into it.
Yeah, exactly. Good point, Landon. Verse 31. He hath despised the word of the Lord, hath broken his commandment. The soul that shall utterly be cut off, his iniquity shall be upon him. Verse 30. The soul that doeth aught presumptuously. So he may have, this guy may have been an outright rebellious acting sort of fella. I'm picking up sticks and I don't care what you say. So again, we don't have any more information than what we've read right here. Thomas.
I would agree with you, but also too, clearly in it, this is what, in that passage, he clearly is saying, hey, they brought him to Moses because he did this wrong.
Yeah.
So this is wrong. It's not just other things. Clearly in that passage, it's saying, hey, what he did was wrong, picking up sticks on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
And if you go back to, Exodus 20, verse 8, and it talks about how on the Sabbath day, you should not work at all. Yeah. Do no any work is what it says.
So the people understood the rule. It's not like, well, this was such an ambiguous thing. They caught this. He didn't even know he was doing anything wrong. It's not like that. This was a well-known, established rule, and he understood that. Grant?
When you go back to Exodus, talks about the law, 13, but after you speak to the sons of Israel, saying, you shall truly observe my Sabbath, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you, and therefore you are to observe the Sabbath, for it is holy to you. And so when he was doing that, they profaned the Sabbath. They profaned something that was holy.
Yeah.
I think I'd even go the other way if somebody started to make an objection to this. I'd make the point that the Lord is holy and you better observe his commandments. And there's dire consequences. You can go to other examples of that.
Yeah, and the Sabbath law was actually even one of the 10 Commandments. Remember the Sabbath, keep holy. This was not an obscure or questionable thing. The people knew. Josh?
Yeah, I agree with what everybody said. I was just thinking that, you kind of make an emotional argument by saying that, well, God's just up there waiting for somebody to slip up so he can get them. And that's just not the nature of God. He is just and he's holy and all those things are true, but he's also long-suffering. In Psalm 106, it details how Israel rebelled over and over against God. In verse 43 of Psalm 106, it says, many times did he deliver them, but they provoked him with their counsel, and they were brought low for their iniquity. He gave Israel and individuals chances after chance. He gave them the rules. He was long-suffering with them, but eventually that mercy, eventually it's going to end, and he's going to have to hold somebody accountable. And that's what happens.
So he's a loving, forgiving, long-suffering God, but he's also a just God, right? So I tell you what, though, a couple things, and you mentioned this. When you start basing your justification on emotions, well, there's no end to that. When you start justifying your position on hypotheticals, there's no end to that. You can draw all kinds of hypotheticals. You can draw up all kinds of emotional arguments. And people do. But those things don't prove anything, you know. The other thing is, and this passage would be one that would fit into the context of situation ethics, you know. Maybe he understood the rule, but the situation was such he just had to break the rule. Well, when you start justifying breaking any rule, then again, there's no stopping place. If you can break this rule, what rule can't you break? So, you know, there's some real moral lessons to be taken away from this. And I tell you, another rule that you see here is God cares. God cares about the details. To us, this might seem like, oh, this seems like a pretty minor thing. Come on, can't we look the other way? God is a God of details. Tom?
Look, Moses just didn't come down and give the law to a few people. The whole assembly was brought together and
He read it.
and they read it, and they agreed to it.
Yeah.
They're learning who God is. I mean, because you know they hadn't really they served all this time in Egypt and saw the gods of Egypt and different things, and they heard about the God of Abraham and Isaac, but they really didn't know him personally until Moses starts coming on the scene. And so Moses comes on and gets the law, he gives it to the people. Now, here the people see the guy out doing it. They knew the law. They knew he broke the law. They didn't know how to punish him. And so they went to Moses to give the, and this is the punishment that God said. This is what the punishment to fit the crime.
Yeah.
And the people were to carry it out. So, even the guys going out, he knew the law, and they've been sort of educated a little bit. Even you think about the manna that they were being fed with. They didn't show up on the Sabbath day. They were told to pick up 2 days' worth on the day before the Sabbath. And, of course, if they picked up more than that on that up day, it all rotted in there. So when they went out, if they went out to look at it on the Sabbath, it wasn't there. So they started learning about this Sabbath, the importance of it that God placed on it. And then they've gone through, now they see somebody violating the law that God had given. They knew that there was punishment that needed to be invoked, and they solicited God what that punishment be through Moses.
And so the whole nation learns a lesson in this one episode, right, Thomas?
I've been talking with this guy, and he's been kind of going back to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees, he would say that they're very legalist. That's what he would call them, they're legalist. And he's like, that's something that we cannot do, where we put laws on everything and say, you have to do it this way. And I've been going back at him saying, no, God, just like what you're saying, like God wants those details, he wants them, right? One thing that...
Just before you go for it, one of the problems with detail, one of the problems with the Pharisees was that they were making their own laws.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I was looking up, they made 39 categories of work, of like what you cannot do on the Sabbath, right? And that's something that Jesus was like, no, you're going too far onto this, right? My question though too is like, when we classify, hey, like, well, this is work, then what exactly can we not do? Because healing on the Sabbath, Jesus healed on the Sabbath. He also told the Pharisees to go pick grain on the Sabbath as well. There's a couple other things as well. And so then the question is, okay, how far is too far though? Where you say that's work, but that one isn't work.
I really don't know how to answer
Hey,
that.
Mr. Gray.
In this case, I know that the people understood that this guy shouldn't have been doing what he's doing, because they were, as Tom pointed out, they're the ones who came and reported to Moses. So this was pretty cut and dry. I don't know. You could ask me. It would be a sin to brush your teeth on Saturday. We could ask 100 questions, and I don't know how to answer all those questions. But this was an understood case. This was an understood violation of the law that they had been given and that they signed off on. And so this wasn't like an innocent case of somebody. Got another hand? Yeah. Tim.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask the same question Thomas did, but to clarify, Thomas, your question is why could Jesus do it and he could not? The reason that Jesus didn't qualify as a sin is because the Pharisees redefined it as working, right? So the rule was you couldn't harvest. That was the rule. Okay, what they were doing, what the disciples were doing, they were snacking. They grabbed and ate. Okay, that's not harvesting. The Pharisees created extra rules on top of this, not what the original rule was.
Yeah, and Jesus described himself as the Lord of the Sabbath. And I've always thought that Jesus was basically saying, don't tell me the Sabbath law. I know the Sabbath law. I wrote the Sabbath law. And so Jesus clearly was not violating the Sabbath law and could claim so by virtue of the fact that he was the author of the Sabbath law as a part of the Godhead. He was not violating. And how that would break down in regards to this guy, again, it was just a whole different category. Mike, did...
I was just going to say, when Jesus healed on the Sabbath, he said, hey, is it proper to do something good or to do evil here? It was something to do good because he healed that person.
Yeah, but you got to be careful. I don't know if I would use that as the argument for justification, Mike, because then you're going to say maybe this guy was doing good, picking up sticks. Maybe he was taking it to a sick person. I don't think I would justify breaking the Sabbath law because
he wasn't breaking the Sabbath law. Like
Jesus
you said,
was not breaking the Sabbath law.
No, he wasn't breaking the Sabbath law.
Yeah.
But he did do something that was good.
Yeah. Thomas?
I will say, I think the major thing is we need to look back at what the Sabbath law was meant for. And like one of them is, it's about rest, mercy, restoration. That's what the Sabbath was meant for. It wasn't meant for these, stop working, blah, blah, blah. It's for that reason, so we can always go back to God.
Okay. Yeah.
I was just going to say, Mark 2:27 says, and he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. And so that's to your point.
Yeah.
The reason that the Sabbath didn't apply to Jesus is because he was Lord of the Sabbath.
Yeah.
And like you said, he wrote it. And that's why he can perform miracles and not break the law because he's Lord.
Yeah. Let's real quick, wait.
So, back to your point that you made initially, where you was talking about the penalty, because you were saying, "Oh wow, this guy, he could have just been picking up stuff to boil water for his sick kid, right?" So, in our minds, we see a transgression, and then we see a punishment. And we think the punishment needs to meet the transgression. And so we view in our minds, well, this is mild, this is severe, right? And so that's not the only thing that caused someone to die from the laws that were given. So one of the laws was adultery. So if you committed adultery, you were executed with adultery too. But in today's standard, most people would say, what? Just because two people were sleeping together, you're going to kill them? Really? So it would be the same argument because of today's standard.
And I do think that what we have to be real careful about is if we crack that door open and say, well, it's okay, I agree, it's technically wrong, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. If you get to make that judgment about your sin, then I get to make that judgment about my sin. And everybody else does too. And pretty soon we got no rules at all. Right? And so there's a verse that you got to take into this is in 1 Corinthians 10. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11, talking about the Israelites and things that happened to the Israelites. 1 Corinthians 10:11 says, all these things happened to them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. This seems like a pretty minor episode in the life of the nation of Israel. One guy picking up sticks. Why was that even included? Well, it was included because there's a lesson to be learned from it, and we need to learn. We need to learn the takeaway from that. Anybody else have a thought? Mike?
I was going to say that none of us can be just by the law in the sight of God. Now, we're justified by faith. And there are several scriptures in the Bible that indicate this. So,
well, the problem with the law was it couldn't be kept perfectly.
That's right.
And there was no mechanism for justification after you violated
It
it.
says, "Cursed is everyone who does not continue in all the law."
That's right. All right, Tom, I thought.
We go through this, other examples that come out that God uses. It seems like they're, just single them out. Here, after the children of Israel cross over into Jordan and they take Jericho. God gave you some rules about taking Jericho. That all the spoils were supposed to be his. And Achan violated that. And when it was found out, the whole camp stoned him. Well, just a little piece of gold, what difference does it make? We gave everything else to God. So, you have situations like that. You have Uzzah with the tabernacle and, studying that. You have Nadab and Abihu, that did something that God struck them down immediately because they were priests of God. So,
Well, what we're seeing is that God, in all these various episodes that you bring up, I think something we just constantly got to keep emphasizing is God is a God of details. God cares about the details. We have the idea in modern society, the modern society has the idea, God doesn't care. It's no big deal to him. Just as long as you have a good, sincere heart, just as long as if you're just sincere, God will accept anything you care to do. And that's just not true to the God we read about in the Bible. And so this episode, this well-known episode about the guy picking up sticks, there's a takeaway lesson for us to learn in that. So let's move on. We can probably talk all night about that, but let's move on to just a little bit further in this same chapter. I'm still in Numbers 15. At verse 37, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speaking to the children of Israel, bid them that they make them fringes in the borders of their garments throughout their generations. And they put upon the fringes of the border a ribbon of blue. And it shall be unto you for a fringe, that ye may look upon it and remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them, and that ye seek not after your own heart and your own eyes, after which ye shall go a-whoring, that ye may remember and do all my commandments and be holy unto your God. I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. To be your God, I am the Lord your God. And so here's an interesting little tidbit. Again, it doesn't seem like a major event, but it's interesting that the Lord told the Israelites to put a fringe of blue on their garments as a visual reminder of their covenant relationship with him. When you see it, you'll remember, he said. Several things in the Old Testament and in the New Testament are God has instructed for us to remember, to help us remember. But this fringe was a God-mandated thing. Put this fringe on the borders of your garments as a visual reminder of your relationship with me. In the New Testament, go over to Matthew 23, verse 5. When Jesus was condemning the Pharisees, Matthew 23, of course, is that very powerful whole chapter where he just really condemns the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. But as he's condemning the hypocrisy of the Pharisees, one of the things he mentions, chapter 23 of Matthew, verse 5, all their works they do for to be seen of men. They make broad their phylacteries and enlarge the borders of their garments. The phylacteries were like headbands that they wore on which they inscribed different passages from Old Testament scripture. The Pharisees wanted to make a show, though. They wanted to make a show. So they weren't content with just a simple headband. They would actually make a headband, and they'd have a little box attached on the front, and they'd write out scripture, and they'd just stuff that box full of scriptures that they had written. That guy, he must really be religious. Look at him. And they did the same thing with the fringes on their garments. Now, it's interesting to me that the fringes on the garments, that originated with God. God gave that instruction originally, but they had a beautiful, a fringe is a fringe is a fringe. I'm making mine bigger because I want everybody to really know what a good person I am and how devoted to God I am. I'm going to make a big deal. I don't want to make a big show out of this. And so they enlarged the borders on their garments. And Jesus said they're just doing it to be seen of men, and they're not going to be rewarded for doing that. So I think it's interesting that we could, again, here's a moral lesson that's applicable to us. We could take something that God has instructed us to do, but if we do it with the specific intention of drawing attention to ourselves for the praise of men, then God's not pleased with that. So again, it's kind of an interesting moral lesson here. Aaron, I saw you nodding.
I'm thinking too hard. I just keep on going back to, what is the real purpose of this tassel? I think the thought as you read through the scriptures is that you said God is detail oriented. And so we see that God is merciful to those who keep his covenant. That's what this is about. And so for us today, as you just talked about in Corinthians, God is merciful to those who keep his instructions today. He has instructed us in how to put on Christ. Those are details. They're instructions. And he has mercy then on those who put on Christ in baptism and live by those instructions that are given in the New Testament.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Again, this is so we're talking about stuff here that's 3,500 years old. It's about that long ago when these events happened in Old Testament time. But it seems so important. It's so interesting to me that there's still great applications. Let's look at the next chapter. The next chapter, well, actually, chapter 16. I want to look in chapter 16. In chapter 16, there's an attempted rebellion against the leadership of Moses and Aaron. Numbers 16, verse 1, now Korah, the son of Izhar, and the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, the sons of Reuben, took men. They rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron and said to them, ye take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Wherefore then lift ye up yourselves above the congregation of the Lord. I don't think we have too much trouble understanding that they're rebelling against the authority of Moses and Aaron's leadership. And so the outcome of that is, and again, we're just hitting the highlights. If you skip over to verse, let's see here, skip over to about verse 26. Moses spake to the congregation, saying, depart, I pray you, from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing of theirs, lest ye be consumed in all their sins. So they gat up from the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan and Abiram on every side. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood in the door of their tents, and their wives and their sons and their little children. And Moses said, hereby ye shall know that the Lord hath sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of my own hand. If these men die the common death of all men, or if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then the Lord hath not sent me. But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth and swallow them up with all that appertain to them, and they go down quick into the pit, then ye shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord. And it came to pass, as he had made an end of speaking all these words, that the ground clave asunder that was under them, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up, and their houses, and all the men that appertained to Korah, and all their goods. And so God gave a very emphatic, what would we say, verification of Moses' authority over the children of Israel. These men who had presumed to question his authority, the earth opens and swallows them up, them and their children and everything that pertained to them. In the course of this, we didn't read it, some of those men had also made censers to burn incense, and they gathered those up and made took those metal censers that they had been burning incense in, and they took those and beat them into a covering for the altar. I don't want to overdo this idea of making present-day applications of the events we're reading here, but I think there's another one here. God has a system of authority in place. He always has had. We're not under the same system of authority that existed for those children of Israel, but we're under a system of authority as God's people today. And God expects us to honor that system of authority. You know, to a lot of people, I'm sad to say, to a lot of people, a lot of our own brethren, I'm afraid, they're just not too concerned about Bible authority, about doing Bible things in Bible ways, about following the careful instructions of God's Word. But God cares about authority. And we see that here. And when Moses' authority was challenged at all, this was a pretty emphatic reaction by God in regards to that. So again, I think that's probably a good takeaway. Now, the people weren't too happy about this. So skip down here to verse 41. On the morrow, all the congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, saying, Ye have killed the people of the Lord. And it came to pass, when the congregation was gathered against Moses and against Aaron, that they looked toward the tabernacle of the congregation, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And Moses and Aaron came before the tabernacle of the congregation, and the Lord spake to Moses, saying, Get you up from among this congregation, that I may consume them as in a moment. And they fell upon their faces, and Moses said to Aaron, Take a censer and put fire therein from off the altar, and put on the incense, and go quickly into the congregation and make an atonement for them, for there is wrath gone out from the Lord. The plague is begun. And Aaron took as Moses commanded, and ran into the midst of the congregation. Behold, the plague was begun among the people, and he put on incense and made an atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stayed. Now they that died in the plague were 14,700, besides them that died about the matter of Korah. And Aaron returned to Moses and to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the plague was stayed. Sometimes I'm just in awe of what some of these characters did in Bible time. I just saw the ground split open and swallow up Korah, Dathan, and Abiram and everything that belonged to them. And the next day I'm going to complain about it? Are you got to be kidding me. I just saw how God reacted to Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and now I'm going to complain at how that happened? I'm just in awe of that. But, again, human nature hasn't changed all that much, and people still, they don't even use good common sense when it comes to a lot of things. And to me, that just doesn't even make sense that they would complain about that after what they just seen the day before. But they did. And now it says that an additional 14,700 died from the plague that resulted because of their rebellious nature, again against Moses and Aaron. So the next chapter, and we won't read in chapter 17, the next chapter, I think clearly God sees that there's a very important need to verify the authority and leadership of Moses and Aaron. And so he has a representative of every tribe bring a staff or a rod, representative of that tribe, and for the tribe of Levi, Aaron's rod, and then put them before in the tabernacle. And the next day when they came to investigate what had happened to those rods, verse 7, I'm in chapter 17, verse 7, Moses laid up the rods before the Lord in the tabernacle of witness. It came to pass on the morrow, Moses went into the tabernacle of witness. Behold, the rod of Aaron for the house of Levi was budded and brought forth buds and bloomed blossoms and yielded almonds. And Moses brought out all the rods from before the Lord unto the children of Israel, and they looked, and every man and took every man his rod. And so, again, this was just a means by which God would verify that Moses and Aaron have the authority that he has assigned to them. Interestingly, if you go over in Hebrews chapter 9, this is mentioned in Hebrews chapter 9 at verse 4. Actually, verse 3. Hebrews 9, verse 3, describing the tabernacle and temple. After the second veil, so when you went into the tabernacle later, when you went into the temple, you went into the holy place. Of course, only priest could go into the holy place. Only the high priest could go in beyond the veil into the most holy place. Only the high priest could go there, and he could only go there once a year on the Day of Atonement. But it says, after the second veil of the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all, which had the golden censer, the Ark of the Covenant overlaid round about with gold, wherein, what was in the Ark of the Covenant? wherein was the golden pot that had manna, and Aaron's rod that budded, and the tables of the covenant, the Ten Commandments. And so the Hebrew writer mentions this Aaron's rod that budded, and it was preserved and saved and put into the Ark of the Covenant as a part of the testimony of God. Thoughts or comments here, anybody? Tom?
These people that God, they brought before God. There were like 250 people that were of the high-ranking Israelites there that the assembly had selected to go from there. Then when God destroyed them, it was like that assembly. But we chose those people. How could you destroy them? That was our choice. And, and God said, it wasn't my choice. It was, it was your choice.
So you got to get the idea we don't get a choice in such matters.
Right. So, but it was that, you sort of see where that murmuring came from.
Yeah.
These were the men that we selected,
Yeah.
How could that happen to them?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I think a lot of interesting lessons to draw from that. Chapter 18. In chapter 18, we read about, get a little more definition of the priesthood. In Numbers 18, verse 1, the Lord spake unto Aaron, Thou and thy sons and thy father's house with thee shall bear the iniquity of the sanctuary, and thou and thy sons with thee shall bear the iniquity of your priesthood. And thy brethren also of the tribe of Levi, the tribe of thy father, bring thou with thee, that they may be joined unto thee and minister unto thee. But thou and thy sons with thee shall minister before the tabernacle of witness. And they shall keep thy charge and the charge of all the tabernacle. Only they shall not come nigh the vessels of the sanctuary and the altar, and neither they nor ye shall neither they nor ye shall die. They shall be joined to thee and keep charge of the tabernacle of the congregation for all the service of the tabernacle, and a stranger shall not come nigh unto you. And ye shall keep the charge of the sanctuary and the charge of the altar, that there be no wrath any more upon the children of Israel. So, a lot of times when we talk about the Old Testament priesthood, we talk about the priest of the tribe of Levi. But actually, we have to be more narrow than that. To be a priest under the Old Testament times when the Israelites were serving under the law of Moses, you had to be a Levite, but more than a tribe of Levite, you had to be a descendant of Aaron. Now, Aaron was a Levite. Aaron and Moses were Levites. But you had so the Levites had special responsibilities relative to the tabernacle and later the temple. But the priests had to come from the descendants of Aaron. And so when we talk about the Levitical priesthood, sometimes that's the way we refer to it, the Levitical priesthood. Well, it's not inaccurate, but just for understanding's sake, make sure we remember that the priests were not only Levites, but Levites specifically descended from Aaron. Okay? Any thoughts or comments on it? Also, one of the questions we asked was what was part of what supported the priests, not just the Levites. We know that the tithes of the children of Israel would support the Levites, but for the priests specifically, verse 8, chapter 18, verse 8, the Lord spake to Aaron, Behold, I have given thee the charge of my heave offerings, all of the hallowed things of the children of Israel. Unto thee have I given them by reason of an anointing, and to thy sons by an ordinance forever. So the priests specifically could participate in a part of the sacrifices that were given by the children of Israel as part of their support. All right, maybe we got time to cover one more episode here. Yes?
I just wanted to point out, I thought it was interesting how God, he already had planned out how each family or each tribe, or not each tribe, but each part of the Levite tribe would take part in what their labors around the tabernacle or the temple. And we have an example of that in the New Testament where it talks about John's father,
John the Baptist's father.
John the Baptist's father, how he was doing his Levitical duty. And what is very interesting that I think that it brings out, and I probably need to bring this up to Timothy, is they stopped working at 50, so they retired at 50. Yeah, yeah.
What's your point? Okay. In chapter, let's see, let me skip down here. In chapter 17, let's go into chapter, no, wait a minute. That's not where I want. In chapter 20, verse 8. The people are complaining. There was no water. Chapter 20, verse 2. There was no water for the congregation. They gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. The people chode with Moses and spake, saying, Would God we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. Why have you brought up the congregation of the Lord into this wilderness, that we and our cattle should die there? We've talked a lot about this. It is just absolutely incredible how frequently they get right back into this griping and murmuring and complaining mode. I mean, and the point we keep making here is that they look absolutely despicable when they do this. And we should learn from that. When we gripe and complain and murmur and act like they acted, we look pretty despicable too. So learn that lesson from the Israelites. So, verse 6, Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and they fell upon their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Take the rod, and gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye into the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth his water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock. So thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts drink. And Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him, and Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock. And he said unto them, Hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice, and the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and the beast also. Now, remember, and if you don't have this written in your margin, you might want to write in your margin, Exodus 17. In Exodus 17, verses 5 and 6, the Lord spake to Moses. This is a previous episode, remember. The Lord spake to Moses, Go ye before the people, take with thee the elders of Israel, and thy rod wherewith thou smotest the river. Take it in thy hand, and go. Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. So in that first episode, he was told, Strike the rock, and water will come forth. He was not told to strike the rock here. He was told to speak to the rock, but he struck the rock. And a lot of times when people considering this episode, they say, well, the problem was he wasn't supposed to strike the rock. He was supposed to speak to the rock. He struck the rock the first time. This time he was just supposed to speak to the rock. And that's why God was displeased. I actually think that does not cover the story accurately. I think at the end of verse 10, when Moses said, Hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? He didn't honor God. He didn't glorify God. He was taking at least partial credit for what was happening here. So keep reading there. The water came, but in verse 12, the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, Because ye believe me not to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. And so, but notice, God didn't say, well, you struck the rock and I told you to speak to the rock, and that's why you're not going into the promised land. No, he said, because ye did not sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel. In other words, he was taking personal glory in what he had done. And so the punishment was, you're not going into the promised land. Last week when we talked about after the spies, nobody over 20 years old was going to go into the promised land except Joshua and Caleb. And I asked you the question, well, what about Moses and Aaron at least? Well, here we see Moses and Aaron also excluded because of this episode. But again, I think if we get the real picture, it wasn't because he struck the rock versus speaking to the rock so much as, of course, that was not, again, he didn't follow God's instructions. That's bad enough. But what seems to be particularly emphasized here is that he didn't give the glory to God and took it upon himself. And so he's not going to get to go into the promised land after all that he's done. Again, God cares. And you see that we have a God who cares about such things. All right, we're out of time. Thanks, everybody. We'll continue our study there next week, Lord willing.